The news struck like a sudden storm on a calm day. I was folding laundry when the phone rang, and the instant I heard the unsteady voice of the officer on the line, my heart froze. His words were a blur as he described the accident. My husband, Adam, was gone. A terrible car crash had taken him from me, from us. It felt unimaginable, like a cruel joke I couldn't find humor in. For weeks afterward, I moved through life in a fog, each step burdened by the crushing weight of loss. My son, Alex, just 17, was the only reason I managed to get out of bed each day. He was the mirror image of his father. Sandy hair, piercing blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The sorrow in his gaze reflected my own, and it broke me to see him struggling to stay strong for me when he was barely holding himself together. The funeral day was bright and clear, as if the sky hadn't gotten the message about our devastation. I stood at the graveside, gripping Alex's hand as if it were my only anchor. He didn't cry. Not since the night we received the news. He stood there, silent, his jaw tight, staring at the casket as if he could will Adam to rise and prove it had all been a mistake. When everyone else had left, I remained, kneeling by the grave, whispering words I wished I had spoken while Adam was still alive. I couldn't comprehend how he was suddenly gone, or how we were supposed to keep living without him. A few steps away, Alex stood with his back turned, staring at the rows of headstones, lost in his pain. It was then I realized how isolated he seemed, and I felt a pang of guilt for being so consumed by my own sorrow that I hadn't noticed his. The house felt different afterward. Emptier, haunted by Adam's absence. His shoes remained by the door, his jacket still hung on its hook in the hallway. I couldn't bear to move them, as if keeping them there could somehow keep him with us. Alex withdrew more, spending most of his time locked in his room or staying out late, refusing to talk about his father or anything else. It was like he'd built a barrier I was too fragile to break through. One night, weeks after the funeral, I heard a sound downstairs well past midnight. I wrapped a robe around myself and went to the kitchen, where I found Alex sitting at the table, his head in his hands. The sight shattered my heart all over again. "Alex," I whispered gently, stepping closer. He didn't look up, but his trembling shoulders gave him away. Without speaking, I wrapped my arms around him and he crumpled into me, the dam finally breaking as he let out raw, gut-wrenching sobs. It was the first time I had seen him cry since the accident. I held him close, letting him pour his grief into me. "I can't do this," he choked out between sobs. "I can't live without him." His words cut through me like a blade because they echoed my own fears. I wanted to promise we would get through this together, but deep down, I wasn't sure we would. I had no solutions, no way to make the pain go away. All I could do was hold him and cry alongside him, sharing the unbearable grief that had become our new reality. After that night, something shifted. Breaking down together seemed to dissolve the barrier he'd built, and in its place, a fragile understanding took root. We began spending more time together, sharing dinners at the table instead of separate rooms, watching TV together in the evenings. It wasn't like before, but it was something. A few months later, I found Alex sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album filled with pictures of Adam. His playful smile, the way he'd ruffle Alex's hair, the look of pure happiness when he held Alex as a baby. I sat beside him, and he didn't move away. "He was a good dad," Alex said softly, voice thick with emotion. "The best," I replied, resting my hand on his shoulder. We stayed there in silence, lost in the memories. It felt like a small step toward healing, a tiny crack in the darkness that had surrounded us since Adam's death. I realized then that we were both holding on to Adam in our own ways, afraid that letting go might mean losing him completely. Over time, we found a new rhythm. It felt incomplete but was undeniably ours. Alex opened up more, sharing stories about his father, even laughing at jokes Adam used to tell. There were still tears, but moments of genuine happiness began to surface too. The pain of losing Adam never disappeared, but it became part of us, woven into the fabric of our lives. We learned how to carry it, to let it remind us of how deeply we had loved and how profoundly we had been loved in return. One evening, as we sat in the backyard watching the sunset, Alex turned to me and asked, "We're going to be okay, right, Mom?" I looked at him. This young man who had grown so much and saw so much of Adam in his eyes. It was a bittersweet comfort, but it was enough. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand gently. We're going to be okay. And for the first time, I truly believed it. As the months continued to pass, the numbing pain softened into a quieter sadness, easier to bear. The initial sharp, gut-wrenching pain had dulled over time, evolving into a persistent, manageable ache, like an old injury that aches during rainy weather. It became a part of our lives. Alex turned his attention more toward academics during his final year of high school, determined to get accepted into a good college, just as Adam had always encouraged him to do. I noticed how intensely he was dedicating himself, using schoolwork as a way to distract from the lingering sorrow. I worried for him, burdened by all he carried, but understood that this was his way of coping. He needed something to hold on to, a purpose to keep moving forward when everything else felt empty. One evening, while I was clearing the dinner table, Alex entered the kitchen. His expression, a blend of hesitation and importance, was one I had grown to recognize. Mom, he began, pausing as if uncertain how to express himself. I set the dish down and gave him my full attention. What is it, sweetheart? I asked gently. He inhaled deeply, running his hand through his tousled hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Adam that it made my chest tighten. I've been thinking about college, he said carefully. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. I got an acceptance letter today, he revealed, pulling a slightly crumpled envelope from his pocket. He handed it to me, and as I unfolded it, I saw the familiar emblem of the university Adam had once attended. His dream school, the place he'd always talked about. A surge of pride mixed with a sharp pang of grief filled me. Oh, Alex, that's wonderful, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. He held my gaze for a long moment before admitting, I don't know if I should go. It feels wrong, like I'd be leaving you behind. His words hit hard. I had sensed this fear, the belief that he was the only thing keeping me grounded, that leaving would mean abandoning me. But it wasn't true. Though I was struggling, I wanted more than anything for him to chase his dreams, just as Adam would have wanted. I stepped closer, placing my hands gently on his shoulders. Alex, I said softly, you're not responsible for me. I know it feels that way now, but I promise I'll be okay. You need to do this for yourself, not for me. He looked down, biting his lip. But what if you need me? What if it's too much for you without me here? He whispered. I pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close as I reassured him. You've given me more strength than you realize, but your life is just beginning, and I need you to live it fully. For both of us. He nodded slightly, pressing his face into my shoulder, his arms tightening around me. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice vulnerable and small, like a child again. Me too, I confessed. But we'll get through this. We always do. Evenings spent together became my favorite part of the day. Alex was making a conscious effort to be there for me, sensing my struggles after the loss. But I also noticed changes, subtle shifts in his behavior, in the way he looked at me, and the small gestures that once felt ordinary now carried a different weight. One night, while we watched an old movie together on the couch, Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulders like he used to when he was younger. His hand was warm, and I noticed a faint tremor. When I turned to check on him, he met my eyes with a gaze that felt different. Not the look I was accustomed to. Something had shifted, though I couldn't fully understand what. Are you all right? I asked softly. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine as though he was trying to communicate something words couldn't express. I'm just really grateful for you, he murmured, giving me a small, uncertain smile. His hand slipped from my shoulder, the warmth of his touch lingering. I'm grateful for you too, I replied, attempting to break the strange tension by looking away, yet feeling the lingering intensity of the moment. It was brief, but there was something in that exchange, more than simple gratitude from a son to his mother. The next morning, I rose early and went to the kitchen. Alex was already seated at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. When I entered, he looked up, holding my gaze longer than usual. There was something in his expression, something that felt unsettlingly out of place, as though he was working through emotions he couldn't quite voice. Mom, he started quietly as I poured myself coffee and sat beside him. His voice was hushed, hesitant. You know how much I love you, right? Of course I do, I replied with a warm smile, though my heart quickened slightly. It's not just love, Mom, he continued, leaning closer. It's something more. I don't know how to handle it. I froze, uncertain at first what he meant. His eyes held emotions I had never seen in them before. Not the look of a child seeking comfort, but something deeper, more complicated. Alex, I whispered, struggling to make sense of his words. This isn't right. You know that. He looked away for a moment, then met my gaze again, more determined. I know, but I can't stop it. Ever since it became just the two of us after Dad died, things changed. I see you differently now, and I can't pretend I don't. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I was at a loss for words, torn between confusion and the ache of loneliness I had felt since Adam's death. Yet I knew this was wrong. We're just hurting, Alex, I tried to explain, desperate for reason. We're lonely and grieving, and we're seeking comfort in each other because we miss him so much. It's not just that, he insisted, his voice stronger now. I feel like I've always looked at you this way. I just didn't realize it before now. His words left me speechless, stunned by the depth of his feelings. I rose from the table, feeling the need to step away since I couldn't deal with this at the moment. Alex, we can't keep talking about this, I said, shifting my gaze to the window to avoid meeting his eyes. Why not? He questioned, stepping nearer but halting a few feet away. We're alone, Mom. Maybe it's not right, but it's the truth. There's something real between us, and we both feel it. His words weighed heavily on me, pressing down like an unbearable burden. Turning back toward him, I could see not just his pain and confusion, but also something else, something I was afraid to admit to myself. You're my son, I whispered, my voice trembling, and I'll always love you, but we can't let this alter who we are. We can't cross that line. He stepped back, his shoulders sagging as though he'd just lost a battle he never had a chance of winning. I didn't mean to frighten you, he murmured, lowering his eyes. I just couldn't keep it inside any longer. I moved toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder and gently raising his chin so our eyes would meet. We're both struggling, I said gently. I understand your feelings because I'm confused too, but we'll find another way. Together, as a family, Alex nodded, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. As a family, he echoed, though his voice carried a sadness as if he knew the meaning of those words had shifted for us. In the days that followed, a tension lingered between us, persistent and thick, no matter how hard I tried to break it. We moved around the house cautiously, avoiding even accidental touches in the hallway and keeping our eyes downcast at the dinner table. It felt as though a thread had been pulled from the fabric of our relationship, unraveling everything we had once believed we understood about each other. One evening, while I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner, I sensed Alex's presence behind me before he spoke. He had a way of silently appearing, as if gathering the courage to speak, yet constantly second-guessing himself. I turned around, drying my hands on a dish towel, and forced a smile. Is everything all right? I asked, trying to keep my voice upbeat, though I knew things were far from fine. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. It was the same look he had given me days earlier, the one that made my heart race in a way that left me unsteady. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the other night, he finally said. I shouldn't have said what I did. Relief swept over me, but it was quickly followed by a sharp ache, an emotion I was unwilling to name. You don't have to apologize, I replied, stepping closer and resting my hand on his arm. We're both grieving, both lost. It's natural to seek comfort, even if it comes out in unexpected ways. He didn't recoil from my touch. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, holding it as though it anchored him. I know, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. But it's more than that for me. I can't pretend otherwise, even though it would be easier if I could. His honesty caught me off guard, and I felt a tremor run through me. I searched for words that could make this all disappear, restore the boundaries we had so carefully drawn. But nothing came. We stood there, the silence growing heavier, our hands intertwined in a way that felt far from innocent. Alex, we can't, I began, but my voice broke when he moved closer. I know we can't, he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek as he leaned in, his body heat so near it made me feel overwhelmed. But that doesn't stop me from wanting it. His confession shattered something within me. I pulled my hand back, retreating as though burned. My back hit the counter, and I clutched its edge for support. "You're my son," I whispered, my vision blurring with tears. "We can't do this. We can't feel this way." His eyes, filled with raw vulnerability, stole my breath. "I don't want to feel this either," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But I can't help it. When I see you, all I want is to be close to you, to make you feel loved the way Dad did. It's like something inside me shifted, and I don't know how to make it stop." His words lingered in the air, a desperate plea that tore at what was left of my resolve. My own tears spilled over as I pressed a trembling hand to my lips, shaking my head. "This isn't love, Alex," I said, voice cracking. "It's grief. It's loneliness. We're trying to fill a void that can't be filled this way." He stepped back, wiping his eyes. "Maybe you're right," he whispered. "But it feels real, and I don't know how to turn it off." I felt as though I were standing on a cliff's edge, the ground crumbling beneath me. I had to be strong for both of us, even as every fiber of my being screamed with confusion and a forbidden ache. "We need time," I said at last, voice rough. "Time to heal, to understand these feelings. But we can't keep doing this. It's not fair. To either of us." Alex nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor, his posture one of quiet defeat. "I'll try," he whispered, "but I can't promise it'll be easy." "Neither can I confessed. I ached to pull him into my arms, to comfort him as I once had when he was a child, when a simple embrace could make everything better. But I knew that if I touched him now, it would be different. It couldn't be the same anymore. Those days had passed. The following days were marked by silence as we slipped into a routine of avoiding each other, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Our conversations were strained, awkward, and filled with unspoken pain. I could see the sorrow reflected in Alex's eyes every time he glanced my way, echoing the ache I carried within myself. It felt like we were grieving not only the absence of Adam, but also mourning something intangible, an unspoken connection we had never truly experienced, but both silently longed for, if only briefly.